Nothing says winter confidence like watching someone step onto a frozen lake as if physics takes personal requests. The ice cracks, they look shocked. Nature rolls its eyes. And trust me, that's not even the embarrassing part yet. 1. A man visiting a famous frozen lake decided the best way to test the thickness of the ice was not with a stick or a cautious step or even a moment of rational thought, but with a running start and a leap that suggested he believed momentum could overpower nature. Witnesses reported the ice making that sound, the ominous low crack that every normal person recognizes as the universe whispering, "Absolutely not." The man froze mid-landing, staring at the widening fracture beneath him, as if betrayed by a lifelong friend, despite clearly meeting the lake for the first time. He tiptoed backward like an amateur bomb technician, insisting everything was fine, while the lake continued explaining otherwise. Rangers later said the only thing holding him up was the sheer indignation of the frozen water refusing to deal with his stupidity. Nature truly works overtime during the holidays. 2. A woman strutted onto a partially thawed lake carrying a camera rig that weighed roughly as much as a compact car, prepared to film what she called an aesthetic winter moment. The lake, already struggling through the seasonal equivalent of a midlife crisis, groaned loudly enough to qualify as its own warning siren. But the woman waved off the sound with the confidence of someone who believes all problems are optional. She arranged her tripod, struck a whimsical pose, and then immediately discovered that whimsy is incompatible with physics when water suddenly shot through a crack and soaked everything she owned. Furious, she accused the lake of timing this on purpose, as if freshwater ecosystems participate in petty revenge. Rangers had to escort her back to shore while she lectured the lake about professionalism. To this day, no explanation exists for why she thought ice respects artistic vision. 3. A tourist wearing shoes with the traction of buttered bowling balls decided he was ready for an epic walk across nature's glass floor. He stepped onto the ice, slipped instantly, and continued sliding for an impressive distance, like a curling stone powered by pure overconfidence, before gently colliding with a frozen log and announcing he was testing surface conditions. The lake, unimpressed, responded by popping a crack that echoed across the shoreline, prompting the man to declare that this was totally normal and part of what he called the authentic winter experience. Absolutely no one believed him, not even his travel companions, who had already backed so far away from the lake that they were nearly in the parking lot. Eventually, he crawled off the surface using a technique best described as panicked lizard, insisting afterward that the ice failed him, not the other way around. Delusion keeps people very warm. 4. A group of college students visiting a national park decided the frozen lake was the perfect place to play full-contact football, because nothing says responsible recreation like sprinting on a natural surface that cracks from the temperature of your breath. The students justified it with science, or at least their own version of it, claiming that ice gets stronger if you move fast, a principle known in real physics as completely fabricated. After 2 plays and several heroic slips that would have made cartoon sound designers proud, the ice let out a cracking noise so loud it sounded like the lake filing a formal complaint. The students ran for the shore, tackling each other in the process, ensuring that the biggest danger wasn't falling through the ice but surviving their teammates. They later told a ranger they would have totally stopped sooner if the lake had communicated better. Apparently, nature now needs email alerts. 5. One particularly optimistic man attempted to drive his rental car onto a frozen lake because, according to him, the ice looked confident. The lake, which had literally never expressed a single emotion, responded by immediately fracturing under the weight of the vehicle as though offended by the compliment. The man managed to reverse back onto land before disaster struck, but then spent 20 minutes explaining to an exhausted ranger that he had seen videos where people do this all the time, neglecting to mention that those videos typically come from regions where winter is less of a season and more of a lifestyle. When told this lake was thinner than a corporate apology letter, he sighed dramatically and accused the ranger of ruining the fun, as if the ranger had personally weakened the ice. The car survived unharmed. The man's pride did not enjoy the same fortune. 6. A woman decided the perfect vacation souvenir would be a selfie lying flat on a frozen lake, because nothing captures serenity like willingly placing your entire body weight over a sheet of ice thinner than a coupon flyer. She belly flopped onto the surface, smiled at the camera, and then froze, metaphorically and nearly literally, when she heard the unmistakable crack beneath her ribs. She refused to move, claiming any sudden shift would interrupt the vibe, while her partner begged her to stand up before the lake decided to upgrade from warning noises to a full winter baptism. Eventually, she rolled gently toward shore, narrating her escape like a nature documentary, insisting the experience connected her with the season. According to multiple rangers, the lake's only connection was trying to remove her from the gene pool via polite suggestion. Even the fish were said to be unimpressed. 7. A man attempted to ice fish on a lake that wasn't actually frozen enough to stand on, but was apparently frozen enough for him to assume nature owed him a seasonal hobby. He marched out with a folding chair, a cooler, and a drill, none of which he used correctly. Before he could even attempt to carve his perfect fishing hole, the ice started to sag beneath him like a disappointed parent witnessing a lifetime of bad decisions. He panicked, threw the chair behind him like a medieval catapult, and scurried toward shore in what could only be described as reverse cartoon sprinting. The lake swallowed the cooler as a parting gift, sparing humanity from whatever snacks he had packed. When asked why he thought the ice was safe, he replied, "It looked pretty solid in photos online." The ranger answering him needed a full 10 seconds to regroup before responding. 8. A tourist approached a frozen lake with a drone, determined to film majestic winter footage, unaware that the drone was about to play a starring role in a slapstick cautionary tale. After launching it, he walked onto the ice to get a better angle, despite having an aerial camera literally designed to prevent that. The ice immediately protested his presence with a chaotic chorus of cracking noises, at which point the tourist panicked and tried to run, while the drone, locked in follow mode, enthusiastically chased him like an over-caffeinated hawk. The result was a frantic ballet of slipping, sliding, screaming, and one increasingly confused machine. Eventually, he reached solid ground, leaving the drone to crash land heroically on the ice like a budget action movie sacrifice. He blamed the entire event on glare, though the only thing blinding him appeared to be his own decision-making. 9. A woman visiting from a warm climate approached a frozen lake and immediately declared it basically a giant sidewalk. Armed with this impressive scientific revelation, she stepped confidently onto ice that was actively melting, then seemed genuinely offended when it declined to hold her weight. Her feet shot in 2 different directions, her purse sailed farther than most Olympic javelins, and she clung to the surface as though the lake might negotiate with her if she looked sincere enough. When a ranger helped her up, she insisted the lake should be better marked, despite the giant sign nearby that read in bold letters, "Unsafe ice." She claimed she hadn't seen it because it wasn't a cute color. Apparently, winter safety is now judged by the same standards as boutique candle labels. The lake offered its opinion through another crack, which she interpreted as attitude. 10. A man attempting to impress his date decided to demonstrate his winter instincts, a phrase that turned out to mean absolutely nothing. He led her onto the frozen lake with the swagger of someone who believes confidence can substitute for physics, then began explaining how to listen to the ice for safety. As if summoned by the universe for comedic timing, the ice immediately produced a long, echoing crack that sounded like it was mocking him in fluent sarcasm. His date sprinted back to shore while he tried to style it out by announcing that the lake was just expanding, despite the very visible fracture forming beneath his boots. He eventually gave up the performance and tiptoed off the ice with less dignity than a penguin in roller skates. Reports suggest the date did not evolve into a relationship, presumably because she preferred partners who can identify solid ground. 11. A visiting family decided the frozen lake was the perfect location for a winter picnic, which is fitting because nothing pairs better with sandwiches than the constant threat of submersion. They laid out a blanket, set up a speaker, and even popped open a bottle of sparkling something, all while ignoring the fact that the ice beneath them was bending like a cheap plastic table at a tailgate party. When the first crack shot beneath their picnic setup, half the family insisted it was absolutely fine, while the other half retreated to shore carrying the snacks like evacuees rescuing essential supplies. The patriarch of the group stayed behind to prove a point, though the point appeared to be that stubbornness is immune to environmental cues. He abandoned the scene only when water began seeping through the cracks, a detail he later attributed to unexpected humidity. 12. A woman visiting a frozen lake during sunset decided she wanted a cinematic walk across the ice, the sort of dramatic moment normally accompanied by orchestral music and zero common sense. She stepped out gracefully, arms outstretched like a figure skater in a low-budget perfume commercial, until the lake reminded her that elegance has no contractual immunity from gravity. A sharp crack ricocheted across the surface, transforming her stride into a panicked shuffle reminiscent of a malfunctioning wind-up toy. She attempted to maintain her composure, smiling weakly at onlookers while inching sideways like a crab in denial. When she finally reached shore, she insisted the crack was part of the ambiance, a bold interpretation of imminent peril. The lake reportedly followed up with another loud fracture, as if rolling its eyes. 13. A man who claimed to have watched every survival show ever made ventured confidently onto a lake that even ducks were avoiding. He stomped on the ice as though demonstrating dominance, a technique that works beautifully in scripted television and nowhere else. The lake responded with a crack so deep it likely startled fish 3 ecosystems away. The man froze, reconsidering every life choice that led him to this moment, then attempted a tactical retreat by crawling backward while repeating survival jargon at random, including phrases that were definitely not used correctly. Once he reached safety, he explained that the crack had been a test and that he had passed. The lake declined to comment, but its silence was widely interpreted as disbelief. 14. A pair of tourists decided to recreate a scene from a romantic movie where the characters stroll hand in hand across a frozen lake, blissfully unaware that movie sets typically don't include real consequences. They wandered far from the shore, narrating their love story as if applying for a joint delusion sponsorship, until a thunderous crack jolted them into pragmatism. Their synchronized sprint back to solid ground would have impressed Olympic judges, albeit for the wrong reasons. Once safe, they blamed the poor craftsmanship of the lake, a phrase that left even the ranger speechless. The couple insisted the ice should have been reinforced, revealing a touching if misguided belief that nature customizes itself for photo opportunities. 15. A man visiting from a famously warm region approached a frozen lake with the swagger of someone who treats winter like a rumor. He stepped onto the ice, pronounced it sturdy enough, and immediately proved himself wrong when the surface sagged like a disappointed trampoline. Instead of retreating, he attempted to redistribute his weight by waving his arms and performing an interpretive wobble reminiscent of a confused flamingo. The lake, unamused, released a crack that echoed like a stress fracture in his ego. He finally scrambled back to shore while insisting that the ice had shifted unexpectedly, as though lakes rearrange themselves just to inconvenience him. Witnesses described his exit as both dramatic and educational. The man described it as overblown hype. Nature described it by continuing to crack long after he'd left. 16. A tourist wearing what can only be described as city shoes wandered onto a frozen lake as if auditioning for a winter-themed perfume commercial, despite the fact that the ice was visibly rippling under passing wind like a stressed-out drumhead. He announced to everyone within earshot that he had a natural sense for ice, which apparently meant he didn't believe in objective physical reality. After a few graceful steps, the lake responded with a crack sharp enough to send a goose fleeing. The man froze, stared down, and whispered, "That's normal," even though his reflection looked back at him with the expression of someone drafting their own obituary. His attempt to retreat became a slow-motion, interpretive dance involving arm flailing, toe pointing, and several quiet, desperate apologies to the general concept of winter. When he reached shore, he declared the lake unstable today, as if it typically behaved like a supportive coworker. 17. A woman visiting from a desert climate encountered a frozen lake with the same energy someone brings to a clearance rack: touch everything, test nothing, and assume no consequences. She tapped the ice with her toe, nodded confidently to herself, and stepped out as if awarding the lake a performance review. Unfortunately for her annual evaluation, the ice immediately communicated its lack of interest through a low groan that sounded like a haunted cello. She refused to retreat, insisting the sound meant the lake was settling, a word often used by people who have no idea what's happening but refuse to lose an argument to nature. As she ventured further, the cracks multiplied like a discount horror soundtrack until she finally acknowledged something was wrong. Not because of physics, but because her phone's vibration startled her. She hurried back to shore, insisting she'd gotten what she came for, which appeared to be adrenaline and denial. 18. A man armed with nothing but a lukewarm coffee and overwhelming confidence decided he could jog across the frozen lake for his morning workout, declaring it the most efficient route. Efficiency immediately evaporated when the ice responded to his first step, with a yelp loud enough to scare his coffee into spilling. He froze, reconsidering everything, then whispered, "It's probably fine," the unofficial slogan of people moments away from learning something painful. He attempted a gentle jog, but his feet performed an ongoing mutiny, sliding in every direction except forward in what resembled a tap dance choreographed by panic. When a major crack split across the surface like a lightning bolt, he dropped the remains of his coffee and sprint-waddled toward the shoreline with the urgency of a man who had just discovered mortality. Upon reaching land, he announced that he didn't like the ice today, as though he has historically enjoyed cordial seasons of cooperation with it. 19. A couple visiting a scenic winter lake decided to pose for engagement photos directly on the ice, because nothing says lifelong commitment like standing on a natural trapdoor. They positioned themselves in the center of a clearly sagging section that even local ducks refused to approach, while their photographer shouted instructions such as "more weight on your heels," which is possibly the worst advice ever given, including everything printed in 1990s gym magazines. As cracks began forming stylish geometric patterns around them, neither seemed concerned, preferring to believe the ice was adding drama to the shot. Drama escalated rapidly when one sharp crack caused the photographer to sprint backwards so fast that their camera nearly achieved takeoff velocity. The couple followed in a delayed, chaotic blur, still holding hands, proving romance can survive many things, but apparently not awareness. Later, they commented that the ice made the moment memorable. Yes, nearly falling into a frigid abyss tends to do that. 20. A man from a tropical region decided he understood cold weather physics because he once watched a documentary about penguins, which is roughly as relevant as citing a cooking show to justify building a bridge. He walked onto the frozen lake confidently, believing that ice is basically concrete when it's cold enough. The lake disagreed immediately, releasing a sound that suggested it was filing a restraining order. He paused, nodded thoughtfully, then jumped, up and down to test stability, a technique beloved by no one except fictional characters seconds before disaster. The ice responded by forming a spiderweb of cracks that spread toward him like they were trying to introduce themselves. At last, grasping the concept of danger, he sprinted away, slipping every third step and improvising what could be considered a winter-themed slapstick routine. When questioned, he claimed he'd only been performing stress mapping. The lake, if asked, would likely describe it as harassment. 21. A tourist carrying a fishing rod, longer than his reasoning skills, set out onto a patch of half-frozen lake that had the structural integrity of microwaved chocolate. Despite its glossy sheen and open-water patches visible from 5 feet away, he muttered the timeless phrase of the dangerously confident, "Looks solid enough." The ice made one disgruntled crack. The tourist frowned as if personally offended, and then attempted to reassure himself with phrases like, "It's just adjusting." When adjusting turned into rapidly fracturing, he panicked and began hopping toward what he believed was safety, inadvertently accelerating the ice's complaints. His fishing rod flew behind him like a weird winter flag as he scrambled onto the nearest shore. When a ranger approached to explain basic ice safety, he replied, "Well, it didn't break, so technically I was right." This is the exact mindset that keeps rescue crews fully employed. 22. A woman approached the frozen lake bundled in expensive ski gear that suggested she'd survived Himalayan expeditions, despite her only known winter experience being a chilly grocery store aisle. She announced she was going to train for resilience by walking across the lake in slow, meditative steps, as though the ice cared about her spiritual development. Each step triggered a crack that reverberated through the surface like a passive-aggressive tisk, but she continued, whispering affirmations such as, "I trust the earth to hold me." The earth responded immediately with another crack that suggested it did not reciprocate that trust. A nearby ranger intervened, shouting for her to return to shore, to which she calmly replied, "Fear is an illusion." The ranger pointed out that drowning was not. She eventually retreated, declaring the lake energetically unstable today, as though it had ruined her horoscope. 23. A man decided to test the ice by throwing rocks onto it, starting with pebbles and escalating to fist-sized stones, each one producing cracks that any rational observer would interpret as, "Please stop." He interpreted them as interesting feedback. Encouraged by the fact that the rocks didn't immediately fall through, he stepped out himself, apparently unaware that his weight exceeded that of a rock by a factor uncomfortable for both physics and the lake. The ice cracked aggressively beneath him, prompting him to shout, "I just need to find the strong spots." as if the lake was a treasure map instead of a frozen hazard. His attempt to retreat transformed into small, frantic hops that looked like bad interpretive dance. Once he reached solid ground, he announced that he'd collected valuable data. The lake, meanwhile, collected new cracks. 24. A tourist group convinced themselves that following animal tracks across the frozen lake was a smart idea because if a moose can do it, so can we. Which is bold logic coming from creatures whose ankles spontaneously give out stepping off curbs. They followed the tracks proudly, narrating their adventure like amateur nature hosts, ignoring the glaring detail that the tracks veered sharply off the ice halfway through. They pressed forward anyway, claiming the moose had changed routes for convenience. When the lake responded with a seismic crack, they suddenly reconsidered their commitment to wildlife accuracy and scrambled backward with all the grace of rolling luggage. A ranger later explained that moose weigh more but distribute pressure differently, to which one tourist replied, "Well, how are we supposed to know that?" The ranger blinked slowly, the universal gesture for, "I'm being paid nowhere near enough for this." 25. A couple visiting the lake at night decided that the darkness added mystique to their outing, ignoring the more obvious contribution: total inability to see danger. They stepped onto the ice armed only with a phone flashlight set to the brightness of a dollar store candle. Each step revealed alarming cracks that glowed beneath their feet like nature's neon warning signs. Instead of interpreting this as run, they called it a gorgeous effect, as though the lake had thoughtfully integrated LED mood lighting. When the cracks began spreading faster, they finally panicked, scrambling toward the shoreline while their lone flashlight bounced wildly, illuminating nothing useful. Once safe, they complained about the lack of posted guidance for nighttime visitors, a bold statement considering the lake had provided extremely clear feedback. The only reason they survived was the ice deciding it had better things to do than babysit tourists in the dark. 26. A man equipped with a metal detector approached a frozen lake convinced he was moments away from discovering ancient treasure, because nothing pairs better with thin ice than digging into it. He stepped out cautiously at first, then with increasing enthusiasm once his device started beeping, unaware that the beeping was reacting to minerals in the ice, not buried Viking loot. After a few victorious whoops, the ice let out a deep, resonant crack that sounded like a warning from the underworld. Undeterred, he began chipping the ice with a shovel, prompting every bystander to reconsider the value of free will. When water began pushing through the cracks, he muttered something about getting close before sprinting away, dragging the metal detector behind him like a disappointed parent pulling a child from a carnival. He later claimed he almost made history. The lake silently celebrated that he did not. 27. A group of friends decided to race each other across the frozen lake, which is bold, considering none of them had footwear remotely appropriate for anything more demanding than walking through a carpeted hallway. They lined up dramatically, counted down, and launched themselves forward in a glorious explosion of slipping limbs. Their race lasted approximately 3 seconds before the lake responded with cracks that resembled lightning bolts made of regret. The group abandoned all competitive ambition and retreated in a disorganized stampede, shoving each other aside with the camaraderie usually reserved for reality show contestants. When they reached shore, they argued over who technically won, even though the lake had very clearly declared itself the only participant with authority. The cracks continued spreading long after they'd left, suggesting the lake awarded itself a well-deserved victory lap. 28. A traveler attempting to capture a perfect winter reflection photo stepped onto the lake carrying a camera worth more than his monthly rent, convinced that aesthetics justified whatever risks he was taking. He crouched down low, instructing the lake to stay still, a request roughly as practical as asking a blender to keep secrets. The ice cracked loudly, prompting him to fall backward while clutching the camera to his chest like a cherished heirloom. His retreat was a frantic crab scuttle that disproved his earlier claims of being great under pressure. Once safe, he reviewed the photo and sighed dramatically that it wasn't even that good, as if the lake had ruined the lighting rather than saving him from an unplanned submergence. He left complaining that winter photography requires better cooperation from the environment. The environment, for its part, seemed entirely willing to continue ignoring him. 29. A man visiting the lake with his dog assumed that if his pet ran onto the ice without falling through, then the surface must be safe for him as well. This logic failed on several levels, most notably the difference between a 40-pound animal and a fully grown adult with 3 layers of snacks in his jacket pockets. He followed his overly excited dog onto the lake, only to discover immediately that the ice objected strongly to the new arrangement. A crack shot beneath him, and he responded by freezing in place and whispering, "Don't move," to himself, even though stillness wasn't going to magically convert him into a lightweight spaniel. The dog, confused by the sudden shift from adventure to existential crisis, barked happily and ran circles around him, worsening the situation in ways only pets can. When he finally scrambled back to land, he declared the lake safe for dogs, but unpredictably unsafe for humans, which is a poetic way of saying he miscalculated everything. And that's the grand tour of humans losing arguments with frozen water. Pick the dumbest disaster in the comments, and if you want more, you know what buttons to hit.